In today's video, we're going to look at types of conditional statements. We'll be writing them in both in words and in symbols and converting back and forth between our different types. So the first thing we need to do is go over the types. So we already talked about conditional statements. So again, these are statements that we can write in if-then form. A lot of times I'll have those words if and then to identify where the hypothesis and the conclusion are, but sometimes we'll have to rewrite them in that format to more easily figure out what the different ideas are in that sentence. But let's start out with a pretty straightforward statement. We're going to start with a conditional. If it is a triangle, then it has three sides. And so again, we can map this out. So this is basically an if-then statement. We want to make sure that we know where the hypothesis and where the conclusion are. And again, we can use any variables that we want to symbolize which statement is which. But when we do conditional statements, we tend to use P's and Q's. So the hypothesis in this problem or in this sentence is it is a triangle. Again, not with the if, just it is a triangle. It has three sides is our conclusion. And we could write this in symbolic notation as P arrow Q. And again, if we're just straightforward like that, this is usually the conditional statement. And this can be any two ideas that we're putting in this format. So let's look at some of our other options. So our first one is we're actually going to go down to the next one, Converse. And we can use a little trick here. You'll notice the first two letters on Converse is CO. That basically stands for change order. And so if we're thinking about our P's and Q's, our hypothesis and conclusion, the order we're going to write our sentence in is if Q, then P. We're not going to change the order of the if and the then. We are going to flip-flop our ideas on where those are written. So our new sentence for our conditional, our converse of our conditional would be if it has three sides, then it is a triangle. All right, our second type of statement is inverse. By the way, since this is a recorded video, you can absolutely pause the video anytime you need to if you are copying down your examples as you go through. Also, too, when you finish watching this Edpuzzle video and answering your questions, you should have a completed version of these notes popping up now on Schoology once you've watched that. So if you want to go through, make sure that you got everything down, I'll have exactly this copy of notes posted right after this video. Okay, our second statement is inverse. So instead of changing the order, we're actually going to flip the negations on these. So symbolic version is not P, arrow, not Q. So in essence, we're going to throw a not in front of both ideas. We're still going to keep the if-then structure, but just play around with the ideas themselves. So if it is not a triangle, so again, first idea where we just inserted a not. Oops, let's spell that correctly. Then it does not have three sides. Now, when you're writing these statements out, you can absolutely play around with the grammar so the sentence makes sense. Please do keep in mind, I am not an English teacher, so I am not going to be grading you on your grammar. I'm not going to be grading you on your spelling, although you can't write words like yes as an O, totally different word. But if you need to play around with the grammar for the sentence to make sense for you, go for it. It's all about what order the ideas are in for all of these conditional statements, for our compound statements that we just looked at. The grammar is less important as we're looking at these. Next one is contrapositive. So contra and positive, if you kind of take the word apart, it tells you what you're doing. You're doing contra, kind of the nots, and you're also kind of switching things around. So in symbols, this is not Q, arrow, not P. I like to think of as I'm doing both. I am doing both a change order and a negation or throwing a not into those sentences or statements. So this is if it doesn't, again, grammar, make it work for yourself. If it doesn't have three sides, oops, spelling, let me fix that. 3 sides, then it is not a triangle. Alrighty, and then our last type of related conditional statement is the biconditional. Now think about that prefix, bi. You've heard that before in words like bicycle that has 2 wheels. And so a biconditional is basically a conditional that is written in either order. So I'm actually going to write 2 statements with this because a biconditional should be able to be read in either order. So your ideas are in either order in the sentence, and both would still hopefully be true for this to be a true biconditional. Now, again, we're not so worried about whether these statements are true or false yet. We will be talking about that in the next lesson. So biconditional, our symbols are, we change it up. We have a double arrow. So we could write it in either order. And we're also going to, with that double order, use the wording in the middle, if and only if. And sometimes you might see this abbreviated, and I might use this here as IFF, and that just shortens how much you need to write with it. So this is basically based off of our conditional and our converse. And again, we'll talk more about how these are all related next lesson. But I basically can use my conditional and throw the if and only if in the middle, or I could use the converse and throw the if and only if in the middle. I'm not going to use the regular if and then. So first version that we could use, it is a triangle if and only if it has 3 sides. So again, notice I haven't used if and then like we have in all the other related conditionals. We just substituted this if and only if right smack in between our 2 ideas. I could write it in this direction, or I could write it as basically basing this off of the converse statement. So it has 3 sides if and only if it is a triangle. Either one of these would be a correct way to write the biconditional. It has the if and only if in the middle and our 2 ideas on either end of that. All right, let's look at a practice problem. So our conditional statement, if it is Saturday, then there is no school. So that's basically our if P, then Q. So again, as a reminder, converse, we switch, change order. So that'll be Q, arrow P. Inverse, we throw a negation in, so not P, not Q. Contrapositive, we do both of these. Now, every time I'm writing these, I'm actually modifying the very first sentence. So again, the converse, I switch the order of the conditional. The inverse, I take that original conditional statement and I'm throwing a not in front of both of them. Contrapositive, I'm taking the original conditional, switching and flipping. And then biconditional, take the original, and we're just throwing that if and only if in the middle. Again, always go back to that original conditional statement. So let's write these out. So converse, switch your order. So if there is no school, then it is Saturday. Alrighty, inverse. Again, take your original statement and throw a not in front of everything. So if it is not Saturday, then, wait a second, there is no school. What would be the negation, the opposite of that? Well, there is school. So there is school. Wait a second. Think about those sentences for a second. Are those true sentences? Let's see, if there's no school, then it's Saturday. Well, couldn't it be Sunday or couldn't it be a holiday? Let's see, inverse. If it is not Saturday, then there is school. Well, again, what if it's Sunday? There's no school on Sundays. Let's see, contrapositive. Switch and flip, do both to the original statement. So if there is school, again, changing the negation of that second idea, then it is not Saturday. That would actually make sense. So if there is school, it's not Saturday because it must be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. All right, and then biconditional, again, take either your original or your converse. Get rid of the if then, throw the if and only if in the middle. So it is Saturday if and only if there is no school. Again, that doesn't quite make sense with this one, but again, we're not quite as focused today on whether these statements are true or false. We're going to look more deeply at those patterns next lesson. With this lesson, it really is all about, let's just get these patterns down, and then we can start talking about some of their different properties next lesson. All right, again, pause the video if you need to write stuff down, but let's go through one more of these together, and then you're going to try one on your own. All right, here we go, example 2. I'm actually going to go ahead and change my color. Let's go to red. Why not? All righty. So if the temperature is 25 degrees Fahrenheit, then it is below freezing. So again, that's our if P then Q. So again, if it helps you remember the order, jot it down. So converse is switch, inverse is not, contrapositive is both, so not Q, then not P. Biconditional, if and only if. Here we go. So converse, switch your ideas. The temperature is 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, that was our P statement. It is below freezing. That was our Q statement. And that's another thing that you can do if it helps you to kind of diagram your sentences to keep things straight. Go for it. Alrighty, converse, switch our order. If it is below freezing, then the temperature, and I'm going to abbreviate, is 25 degrees. 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Alrighty. Well, that could potentially be true, but not every scenario. Freezing is what, 32 degrees Fahrenheit? And so if it's 25 degrees, sure. But what if it's 0 degrees? That's also freezing in Celsius as well. Okay, inverse, throw a not in front of everything. So if the temp is not 25 degrees Fahrenheit, then it is not below freezing. Again, you could write that as, if you want, as then it is above freezing, because that is the opposite idea. However, when I write these, I tend to just throw a not in front, because then I don't have to worry so much about the vocabulary, but I can see very easily whether I have a not or if I don't. Okay, contrapositive, go back to your original, flip it around, switch your negation. So if it is not below freezing, then the temp is not 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, that's true. If it's not below freezing, your temperature has to be above 32 degrees, and that would mean it can't be 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, biconditional, again, take either your converse or your original conditional statement and just throw the if and only if in the middle. I tend to use the original conditional, so the temp is 25 degrees Fahrenheit if and only if it is below freezing. Alrighty. So again, are all of these true statements? Well, no, they don't have to be. Again, kind of like when we were writing our and or statements, sometimes we'll have true statements, sometimes we'll have negative or untrue statements or false statements. And really, the only patterns we've talked about is with the and or statements. We'll talk a lot more about which ones of these statements actually come out true in our next lesson. So we'll look at different possibilities and how we can combine those and how we can really determine without a doubt which one of these is a true statement. All right, so at this point, I'm going to have you go ahead and pause the video. And I want you to try out number 3. Before you try out number 3, though, let me scroll down to that one. It's asking you to do this with the statement, all dogs bark. Well, wait a second. All dogs bark. Well, that's actually not an if-then form. So we should probably write it in if-then form. So let's do that. So if I change this into an if-then statement, well, what are our two ideas? We have dogs, they bark. So if it is a dog, then it barks. All right, so go ahead. That is our conditional statement. So we can actually take that and write that in the conditional spot. So if it is a dog, then it barks. And go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to try out writing the conditional statements related to that. All righty, now I realized I had my camera turned off, so hello, how are you doing? I just want to make sure you know it's me recording these videos. Okay, real quick, let's check your work on these. So Converse, switch your order. So if it barks, then it is a dog. Okay, inverse, throw nots in front of it. If it is not a dog, then it doesn't bark. Again, not true. Seals can bark. Humans can bark, although it's a little bit odd when they do, but that's okay. Contrapositive, switch and flip. So if it doesn't bark, then it is not a dog. And biconditional, if and only if. So it is a dog. If and only if, let's abbreviate that, it barks. All righty. So the last thing that we're going to do is let's just look at these symbols and see how we can maybe see some more patterns going on. Again, sometimes you'll see these statements written out in words, sometimes you'll see them written in symbols. So here we go. So our practice with symbols, we're going to do this chart again. You're not going to see this chart too often, but being able to use your symbols and what you know about the different types of conditional statements is still important to know how to do. So I'm going to change my color one more time because why not? Let's change back to red. Actually, let's change it blue. That's a little easier to read. So let's start off straightforward. Number 4, P arrow Q. So if P, then Q. So converse is switch your order. Q arrow P. Inverse, always go back to the original conditional statement and throw a not or that little tilde symbol in front of everything. Contrapositive, switch and flip. So negate Q, arrow, negate P. Biconditional, throw a double arrow in between. Now, there are definitely some patterns that you might start seeing if you compare like converse to contrapositive or like inverse back to converse. But I find it's a whole lot easier for me to keep these patterns straight if I always think about just how is it related to that original conditional statement. So if you always start with that as your reference, it's going to be a lot easier to remember these patterns. Okay, number 5, not P arrow Q. Again, let's switch just the order of where the symbols are written. So R arrow, not P. Inverse, throw a negation. But again, if you already have a negation, what's the opposite of an opposite? It's kind of like doing a negative times a negative. Well, it comes back out positive. So negation of not P is P. Negation of R is not R. Contrapositive, we do both. We switch and flip. So a negative R, arrow, positive P. And biconditional, I just usually take the original conditional statement and throw a double arrow in between. Alrighty, number 6, wait a second, I didn't give you the conditional statement. I gave you the converse. But if we always try to go back to the conditional, then we will still be able to finish the problem thinking about those same patterns all along. So converse we know is switch order. So we would have switched the order to get to C arrow D, which means if I had to switch it back, it would look like D arrow C. Now I can follow the rest of my pattern. So inverse, throw a not in front. So not D, arrow not C. Okay, contrapositive, both of them have to be flipped around and switched. So negative C, negative D. Biconditional, double arrow. Alrighty, try pausing the video and see if you can figure the next two out. All right, let's see how you did. So inverse, that means I negated everything to get to the regular x, y, which means they would have had to start out negated. So not x, arrow, not y. Converse, switch your order, not y, then not x. Contrapositive, take the original conditional, not x, then not y, switch and flip. So y, arrow, x. And again, if you compare that back to the inverse, it does look like you just switch them back and forth. But again, if you always start with your conditional statement, then you don't have all those extra relationships to remember. You just need to remember converse is change order, inverse throw in a not, contrapositive do both of them, and biconditional use the double arrow if and only if. And that is the easiest way to remember the pattern. Okay, contrapositive, not T, arrow R, we would have had to switch and flip to get there. So our original should be not R, then T. Converse, switch that order. So T, arrow, not R. Inverse, throw a not in front of your original conditional statement. So that's R, arrow, not T. And biconditional, use that double arrow. Alrighty, this last piece, again, you're not going to see too many of these chart problems, but you might have to go back and forth between symbolic versions. So being able to do things along that one single line is not a bad thing to know how to do. And again, in next lesson, we will look at how we can determine how some of these types of conditional statements might be true and how we can predict some of that. So now that you've watched your Edpuzzle video, you should now have access to a completed version of these notes. So if you watch the video rather than writing things down, then you can absolutely check that out. But I would really, really suggest if you don't write down math, it is a lot harder to remember. So either take that time to write it out with that copy available if you have not had a chance to do that, or at the very least, if you are not all that great with the handwriting out, print it out if you can, and then highlight any important pieces, especially those that you want to talk about next class. See you later.